She swung the leather crop down so hard that the sound cracked across the entire marina like a starter pistol. 43 people heard it. Not one of them moved. What none of them knew. Not the event coordinator clutching her clipboard, not the harbor master standing 30 feet away, not the cluster of blazer-wearing dog owners who flinched and then looked away, was that the quiet man in the worn canvas jacket was an active-duty Navy SEAL on a 14-day leave. And the dog bleeding onto the teak dock boards was a decorated military working dog who had once dragged a wounded Marine out of a burning vehicle in the dark outside Kandahar. The dog's name was Scout. The man's name was Callum. Wait, not Callum, the man's name was Reed. No, that name is on the list. The man's name was Finn. And before this morning was over, every single person standing on that dock was going to understand exactly what they had allowed to happen. The Pacific Rim Sporting Dog Invitational was held every August on the waterfront grounds of the Harbor Point Yacht Club in Victoria, British Columbia. It was the kind of event where the parking lot looked like a luxury dealership and the dogs had their own catering tent. Finn arrived at 7:45 in his 10-year-old Tacoma. He parked between a black Porsche Cayenne and a white Range Rover, so clean it looked like it had never touched a public road. He cut the engine and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. He did this in every new environment. Old habit. He scanned the lot, noted the exits, counted the people moving between the vehicles. His body had never fully learned the difference between a parking lot in Victoria and a forward operating base. Probably never would. "Ready?" he said. The German shepherd in the back seat stood up. Finn stepped out and opened the rear door. Scout dropped to the pavement without a sound. He was 4 years old and built like a piece of agricultural equipment, dense, deliberate, and completely without vanity. His coat was a deep sable that faded to rust along his chest. A ragged diagonal scar ran from his left ear to the base of his jaw, pale against the darker fur. His right rear leg had a slight hitch in its stride from a fragment wound that had healed imperfectly in the field. He stood beside Finn without being told to. He did not sniff the ground. He did not look at the other dogs. He watched the crowd. They walked toward the registration pavilion. The event ground stretched along the inner harbor, manicured lawn and white canvas tents overlooking the water. It smelled like cut grass and low tide and money. People noticed Scout before they noticed Finn. They always did. A woman in a linen blazer steered her Bichon Frise sideways. A man with a showline Labrador pulled his dog back against his leg and gave Finn a look that said, "What exactly are you doing here?" Finn had been getting that look since he was 19 years old. It did not cost him anything. The registration table was staffed by a young woman named Priya. She had an event lanyard and an expression of determined cheerfulness that was already under pressure at 7:50 in the morning. "Name?" she said. "Gallagher. Finn Gallagher, registered for the sporting retrieval trial and the advanced agility." Priya scrolled through her tablet. She glanced at Scout. Her cheerfulness flickered, then held. "I see you here, both events." She handed him a wristband and a numbered bib. "First call is at 9. The warm-up area is down past the main tent." She paused. "His name? Scout." She typed it in. She did not ask about the scar or the limp. "Good luck," she said. Finn nodded and moved on. The warm-up area was contained chaos. Handlers jogged their dogs through weave poles. Spaniels barked at nothing. Someone's whippet had gotten loose and was sprinting in wide, delighted circles, while its owner ran after it, shouting in French. The sound hit Scout like a physical force. The sudden barking, the loudspeaker crackling, the sharp metallic clank of equipment being assembled nearby. Finn felt the leash go rigid. Scout's ears pressed flat. His breathing shortened into quick, shallow pulls. He began to circle, his paws clicking on the concrete path that ran along the edge of the lawn. The people around them stepped back. Someone said something under their breath. Finn heard the word aggressive. He did not look at whoever said it. He stopped walking. He crouched down to Scout's level. He did not reach out to touch the dog. He did not make soothing noises. He waited until Scout's wild eyes found his face. Then Finn raised his hand, 2 fingers together, and brought them slowly downward. Scout stopped circling. "With me," Finn said. "Quiet. Flat." The voice he used when things were serious. Scout's ears came up. His breathing slowed. He sat down on the concrete and pressed his shoulder against Finn's knee, and just like that the panic was gone. Not suppressed. Actually gone. Replaced by something structured and purposeful. He was not a frightened dog anymore. He was a working dog waiting for a task. The people who had stepped back were staring. Finn straightened up and they moved on. There are people in the world who mistake wealth for authority, who have been told so many times, in so many subtle ways, that their money constitutes a kind of permission. Permission to occupy more space, to demand more deference, to treat inconvenience as an insult. These people are not always cruel by nature, but they have been allowed to behave as though they are exceptional for long enough that cruelty has become, for them, simply a form of emphasis. Vivian Alderholt stepped out of a black town car at 8:15. She wore white. Not cream, not ivory, white, at an outdoor dog event, which was either an act of supreme confidence or a complete disconnection from reality. She was 51 years old and moved like every room she entered was already hers. Her dog, a flame-coated Irish setter named Copperton, walked beside her on a fine leather lead. He had placed first in his breed class at 4 consecutive regional shows. Vivienne spoke of this the way other people spoke of their children's university acceptances, with a pride just sharp enough to be a rebuke. She was the founding donor of the Harbor Point Junior Handler Program. Her name was on the entrance arch. The event coordinator, a tired man named Jeffrey, had already fielded 3 calls from her assistant that morning about the placement of her reserved seating. Vivienne spotted Scout from 20 meters away. She stopped walking. Her eyes moved from Scout to Finn, from Finn's jacket to his boots, with the quick clinical efficiency of someone making an assessment they'd already decided the outcome of. She walked toward them. Finn saw her coming. He recognized the posture before she said a word. "Excuse me." Her voice was the kind that expected the room to go quiet. "Is this dog registered for the trial?" "He is." "In what category?" "Advanced agility and sporting retrieval." Vivienne looked at Scout the way you look at something that shouldn't be there. Her gaze moved over the scar, over the hitch in the dog's walk, over the worn leather of the plain work harness Finn had chosen over the padded sport vest that most handlers wore. "This is an invitational event," she said. "The dogs are assessed for conformation as well as performance. Presentation matters here." She paused, precisely long enough to make the next words land. "That animal looks like he was pulled out of a ditch." Finn looked at her. He was assessed at registration. He cleared every requirement. Requirement can be met on paper and still represent a problem in practice. She turned slightly, addressing the small knot of people who had drifted close enough to listen. "We have a responsibility to the integrity of this event. Bringing in an animal with obvious physical deficits and untreated injuries reflects poorly on everyone here." "His injuries are treated," Finn said. "They're healed." "That," Vivienne said, gesturing at the scar, "does not look healed. It looks like neglect." The word dropped into the morning air and sat there. Scout did not react. He sat on Finn's left side and watched a seagull descend toward the waterfront railing. Finn said nothing for a moment. He looked at Vivienne with the same flat, unreadable expression he'd worn since she walked over. Then he said quietly, "My dog is not here to impress you." Vivienne's chin came up. "No. But you're here on grounds that I substantially fund. And I am telling you, as a major stakeholder in this event, that your animal's presence here is inappropriate." She turned to Jeffrey, who had materialized from somewhere with his clipboard already raised like a small shield. "Jeffrey, I'd like this registration reviewed." Jeffrey looked at Finn. He looked at Scout. He looked at Vivienne. He opened his mouth. "His registration is valid." It was Priya who had walked over from the check-in table. She stood with her tablet in front of her like evidence. "Scout cleared the temperament assessment this morning. Perfect score. He's cleared for both events." Vivienne turned to look at her with the patient, terrible expression of someone who has never once been corrected by a junior employee without consequence. "Your name?" "Priya." "Priya, I appreciate your diligence. I would encourage you to understand the full context of the situation before intervening in conversations above your pay grade." Priya's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. Jeffrey took a breath and said, almost inaudibly, "Mrs. Alderholt, the registration." "Jeffrey." Her voice was soft now. Soft was worse. "You know my family has supported this event for 11 years. You know what that support looks like, operationally. I'm asking you to make a decision." Jeffrey looked at the ground. Finn had seen this before too, not in yacht clubs, in the field. The moment when someone with authority over someone else uses it badly, and the person underneath them chooses their salary over their spine. It was one of the most depressing sights in the world, and it was completely universal. "I'll wait for my event time," Finn said. He did not raise his voice. He ended the conversation by removing himself from it. He turned away from Jeffrey and walked Scout toward the edge of the lawn, where the equipment was already set up for the morning's first run. Behind him, he heard Vivienne say, "This isn't over." He believed her. The advanced agility course ran along the northern end of the grounds closest to the water. It was a serious layout, 12 obstacles, timed to the 100th of a second, no handler touching the dog. The scoring combined speed, accuracy, and what the judge's rubric called responsiveness, which was a formal word for the invisible thread of communication between a working team. When Finn and Scout reached the line, the crowd had arranged itself along the rope barrier. There were maybe 60 people. They watched with the polite, slightly skeptical attention of people who had been watching polished dogs run polished courses for 2 days. Finn unclipped the lead. Scout looked up at him. Finn dropped his hand flat, palm down, and held it for 2 seconds. Scout dropped into a crouch so low his belly nearly touched the grass. He coiled like something compressed. His eyes fixed on the first obstacle, a broad jump 8 meters away. Finn brought his hand up. Scout launched. He ran the way he'd been trained to run, which was to say he ran the way he did everything. Completely, without hesitation, without showboating. He cleared the broad jump in a single clean extension and hit the contact zone on the A-frame without slowing. He drove through the weave poles with a fluid, whipping rhythm, no wasted motion, his body bending and releasing through each gate. He read Finn's hand signals from across the course, a flat palm, a pointed finger, a single raised fist, and responded to each one before the crowd had time to register that an instruction had been given. He came out of the tunnel already banking into his turn for the final jump. He cleared it by 1/2 meter. He ran back to Finn and sat. His tongue was out. That was the only concession to effort. The digital display updated. The crowd was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of people recalibrating, and then someone started clapping. Then most of them did. Finn reclipped the lead. He put one hand on the side of Scout's neck. "Good," he said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Envy is a patient thing. It waits for an audience. Vivienne had watched the run from the VIP enclosure. She watched the scoreboard update. She watched Copperton's time, set 40 minutes earlier with a professional handler, and 6 months of dedicated coaching, get erased from the top of the board. She felt something that wealthy people often mistake for righteous indignation because righteous indignation is easier to act on than humiliation. She stood up. She left the enclosure and walked across the lawn toward the area where Finn had taken Scout to rest. It was a shaded stretch near the fence line, away from the noise. Scout was lying on his side in the grass, drinking from a collapsible canvas bowl. Finn sat on a low equipment case beside him. Vivienne stopped 3 feet away, close enough to be deliberate. She had Copperton with her. She had the crop, a long, flexible tool she used to guide the setter's gaze in the breed ring. She held it in her right hand, tapping it lightly against her palm. "Impressive time," she said. The word impressive in her mouth meant something closer to unacceptable. Finn looked up. He said nothing. "I've submitted a formal query to the judging panel," Vivienne said, "requesting a review of the scoring methodology. The rubric allows for discretionary adjustment when an animal's physical presentation is deemed inconsistent with the performance standard. That's not a real rule, Finn said. It will be by this afternoon. She looked down at Scout. He's panting quite heavily. He just ran a course. He looks distressed. She turned to the small group of people who had followed at a respectful distance. Jeffrey, 2 junior handlers, a woman with a show-lead golden retriever. She raised her voice slightly. Wouldn't you say this animal appears to be in distress? He's clearly not built for this kind of exertion. Scout lifted his head and looked at her with complete calm. The performance wasn't working and she knew it. The dog was not providing her with the chaos she needed to justify her complaint. He was just lying in the grass, recovering, doing nothing wrong. She needed him to do something wrong. She stepped forward. She swung the crop. It came down across Scout's back, hard. The metal-tipped end caught the ridge of old scar tissue along his spine. The sound was flat and brutal and wrong. Scout yelped, one short, breathless sound, and his hind legs buckled. He twisted away from the strike. His lips peeled back. Every nerve in his body fired the same response it had fired 100 times in training. Threat, react, defend. Hold, Finn said. The word came out quiet and immediate, and Scout froze. His jaw closed, his body shook. He did not move. Finn was already on his feet. He stepped between Scout and Vivian. He was not loud. He did not lunge forward. He simply placed himself in the space between them and looked at her, and something in the quality of his stillness made the people around them take a half-step backward without entirely knowing why. He bumped into me, Vivian said. She was already constructing the story, her eyes moving to the audience. He lunged. I had to defend myself. He was lying down, Finn said. He is an aggressive animal, and I have been warning everyone here about this all morning. She turned to Jeffrey. Call security now. This dog just attacked a guest. Jeffrey was already on his radio. 2 event security officers arrived in under a minute. They were large men in polo shirts who looked at the scene and understood nothing about it and defaulted, as people in their position almost always do, to the loudest, most credentialed person in the group. Vivian spoke for 4 minutes without stopping. She talked about the liability. She talked about her 11 years of involvement with this event. She talked about the danger to other dogs, to children, to guests. She was a gifted speaker, precise, controlled, emotionally calibrated. She knew exactly how much distress to perform. Finn said nothing during any of it. He crouched down beside Scout. He ran his hands along the dog's spine, pressing gently, checking the response. There was a welt already rising under the fur where the metal tip had landed, red and swollen against the pale scar tissue. Finn pressed his thumb along Scout's hip joint. The dog flinched but did not make a sound. He stood up. He looked at Jeffrey. You watched that happen, Finn said. Jeffrey looked at his shoes. You're both going to have to leave, one of the security officers said. He had the tone of a man who knew what he was being asked to do was wrong and was doing it anyway because the alternative was complicated. Finn looked at the crowd. He saw the same thing he always saw in these moments, the people who knew the truth, making the calculation that the truth cost too much today. He pulled the bib off over his head and set it on the equipment case. Heel, he said. Scout stood. He pressed against Finn's leg. They walked toward the parking lot. Vivian called after them. Finn didn't turn around. There are things that money builds that look like permanence but are only arrangement. Set them up quickly enough for impressive enough guests, and no one asks whether the foundation was checked. The VIP waterfront pavilion had been constructed in 3 days. It was a steel and timber platform extending over the dock to give the premium ticket holders an unobstructed view of the harbor events. It seated 80. It held catering equipment, a portable bar, 2 large canopy sails on mast poles, and enough high-end audio equipment to fill a concert venue. The crew that built it had been working on 4 events simultaneously that weekend. At 10:14 in the morning, as Finn was pulling out of the Harbor Point parking lot onto Dallas Road, the starboard rear column of the pavilion failed. It did not fail dramatically. It buckled at the base fitting. where the steel had been bolted into the dock without the specified load-spreading plate. The column bent inward, the platform tilted. The two canopy masts came down first, tearing through the catering table and sending the bar into the water. Then the deck itself dropped. Not all at once, but in a rolling collapse that gave people on the outer edge time to jump onto the dock and trapped everyone in the center underneath. Finn heard it before he saw it. A deep, structural crack followed by the layered sound of something large coming apart. Not a bang, but a cascade, each element failing into the next. He looked in his mirror. The dust cloud was already rising over the yacht club grounds. He pulled to the side of the road. He sat for exactly 2 seconds. He put the truck in reverse. The scene when he arrived was controlled panic, becoming uncontrolled. Guests who had made it off the platform were standing on the dock in expensive clothes covered in dust, some of them bleeding, some of them helping others, some of them doing nothing but looking at their phones. 2 dock staff were trying to lift a section of timber with their bare hands and getting nowhere. Someone had called 911. No one had called the harbor master. Finn drove across the lawn, stopped the truck 30 feet from the collapse, and got out. Scout was already reading him. The dog watched his face. He was not calm exactly. His nostrils were working hard, taking in the smell of the dust and the stress. But he was waiting. He was ready. Finn moved toward the wreckage, assessing as he walked. The main deck had split along its center line. The forward half had dropped completely into the water. The rear section, attached to the dock, had pancaked down on an angle. The overlapping steel frame had created a compressed pocket on the port side. He could see it from here, where the angle of the collapse had left a triangular void about 18 inches high. He heard someone calling from inside that void. A child's voice. He got to the edge of the collapse and dropped to his knees. The harbor master, a stocky woman named June who had arrived from the dock office at a run, crouched beside him. "I can see a kid in there," she said. "I tried to reach in, but I can't get my shoulders past the crossbeam." Finn looked into the gap. The void was roughly 2 feet wide at its opening and narrowed sharply after about 4 feet. At the end of it, in the dim gray light, a small figure was curled on its side. A boy, maybe 8 years old. He was conscious. He was crying quietly. Above him, a section of steel decking was suspended at a 45-degree angle, resting on a wooden transom that had cracked through most of its width. The wood fibers holding it were audible, a low, sustained creaking under the weight. "Fire department's en route," June said. "ETA 7 minutes. Finn looked at the gap. He looked at Scout. June followed his gaze. "The dog? He's trained for confined space extraction," Finn said. He was already unclipping the lead. "He knows how to low crawl. He can fit. He can bring the kid out. Is he going to? He'll do exactly what I tell him." June looked at the cracking transom. "What if it comes down? Then we'll deal with that," Finn said. "Right now the kid runs out of time before the fire department gets here." June stood back. Finn crouched low and brought his face level with Scout's. He did not speak immediately. He looked at the dog for a moment. Scout looked back at him with those steady amber eyes, eyes that had looked at him in the same way from a helicopter door, from a vehicle checkpoint, from the dark interior of more compromised buildings than Finn could count. "I see you," Finn said. He said it quietly, the way he always did before something hard. Scout's ears came up. "Target! In there! Bring him out! Low!" He pointed into the gap. Scout flattened himself to the dock boards. He began to move. He went in at a leopard crawl, his belly against the wood, his elbows pulling him forward in a rhythm Finn recognized from training. He moved slowly, no wasted force. He eased past the first crossbeam, flattened further where the gap narrowed, and kept going. The cracking sound from the transom intensified. Finn pressed his forehead against the ground and watched Scout's hind legs disappear into the dark. "Hold," he said. The legs stopped moving. A sound above, the timber settling, and then silence. "Move," the legs continued. 40 seconds of quiet, then a small, startled sound from inside, the boy surprised by contact. Then nothing. Then the slow grinding sound of something being dragged. Scout's hind paws reappeared first, then his haunches. He was pulling backward, muscles working under his scarred coat, the motion deliberate and even. He came out 3 feet, then 4. The transom gave. The steel decking dropped 2 inches in a single lurch. The bottom edge caught the ridge of Scout's back, pinning him against the dock boards. Finn heard Scout grunt, a short, forced exhalation, but the dog did not release the boy's jacket. He did not stop pulling. "Push," Finn said. Scout's back legs drove into the dock. He pulled the boy another 18 inches. Finn reached into the gap, got both hands around the child's ankles, and pulled. The boy slid out onto the dock boards. He was dusty and shaking, and he had a cut above one eyebrow that was bleeding into his eye. He was breathing. Scout backed out behind him. His back was bleeding in 2 places where the steel had cut through the old scar tissue and into new skin. He sat down on the dock and panted. He did not whine. Finn ran his hands over the dog's back quickly. He pressed his palm flat against the worst of the cuts, firm and steady. Behind him he heard someone running. Then a sound. Not language, just a broken sound that only comes from a parent. And he understood who the boy belonged to before he turned around. Vivian dropped to the dock boards beside her son. She was still in the white suit, though it was gray with dust now. She gathered the boy against her, and the boy clutched her back, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Finn kept his hand on Scout's back. He heard the fire department sirens coming over the Johnson Street Bridge. The first officer on scene was a constable named Harlow. He was young and methodical, and he moved through the situation quickly, triaging it in his head as he walked. He spoke to June. He spoke to the dock staff. He walked past the remaining guests. Then he looked across the dock and saw the man kneeling beside the German Shepherd and stopped moving. He crossed the dock in 6 steps. He came to attention in a way that had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with recognition. And he said, "Master Chief." Finn looked up. "Wallace," he said. He remembered the face, a joint training exercise in Esquimalt 2 years back. "You're Victoria PD now, 8 months. Wallace looked at Scout, at the blood. At Finn's hand pressed flat against the wound, his face changed. What happened to him? He went into the collapse and brought out the kid, Finn said. Before that, someone hit him with a crop. Wallace's expression flattened into something professional. Who? The dock was quiet. The guests who remained, the ones who had watched Vivian swing the crop that morning and said nothing, heard the question. They felt its weight settle on them. No one spoke. Then a voice from the edge of the group said, "She did." It was Priya. She was still holding her tablet. "I saw it. I can show you the registration notes from this morning, too." Wallace turned slowly to look at Vivienne. She was still sitting on the dock boards with her son against her chest, but she had straightened up when she heard Priya's voice, and she was looking at Finn now with an expression that had lost every layer of armor she'd built over the course of the morning. "He's a military working dog," Wallace said. It was not for Vivienne's benefit. He said it the way you state a fact that matters. He served 3 deployments. He has a commendation for pulling a wounded soldier out of a vehicle fire under direct fire. You struck him. Vivian opened her mouth. Then she closed it. "I didn't know," she said. The words came out small. "That's not a defense," Wallace said quietly. "That's a description of the problem." He looked at Finn. Finn was looking at Scout, not at Vivian. He had a compression cloth from the truck's first aid kit pressed against the dog's back now. Scout's breathing was steady. He was leaning into Finn's arm. The fire department arrived on the dock. The paramedics came behind them. One of them moved toward the boy, who let himself be examined with the dazed cooperation of a child who has used up all his adrenaline. Vivian stood. She held herself upright through what appeared to be significant effort. "I can cover his veterinary care," she said. "Whatever it costs, whatever he needs." Finn did not look at her. "I should have," she started. "You should have." Finn agreed. He said it without particular anger, just as a fact. He adjusted the compress on Scout's back and checked that it was holding. "Your son is okay," Finn said. He said it because it was true, and because it mattered, not because he was absolving her of anything. He was scared, but he's okay. Vivienne's breath caught. She looked at Scout, at the blood on the dog's coat, at the old scar on his jaw, at the quiet animal sitting on the salt-bleached dockboards in the morning sun. She understood then what she had done. Not in the abstract, in the specific, irreversible physical fact of it. She looked like she wanted to say something more. Finn had already turned away. The event director of the Pacific Rim Sporting Dog Invitational, a man named Jeffrey who had spent 11 years being told by Vivienne Alderholt which decisions were really hers to make, walked across the dock and stopped 4 feet from Finn. He had his clipboard. He wasn't using it as a shield anymore. "I owe you an apology," he said. Finn looked at him. "I saw it happen this morning. I should have said something. I didn't." Jeffrey's voice was flat with self-disgust. "I'm sorry." Finn nodded once. That was all he gave. A man in a charcoal blazer had arrived during the paramedic assessment. The regional director of events for the Harbor Point Yacht Club. A compact, unhurried man named Stuart Adeyemi who had driven in from his Saturday morning when his phone started going. He had spent 10 minutes talking to June and Wallace and Priya before he approached Vivienne. The conversation was brief. Finn did not hear most of it. He heard the word membership. He heard the word permanent. He saw Vivienne's face, and that told him enough. Stuart crossed to Finn. "I don't have the language to cover what happened here today," he said, "but I'd like to try. We'll cover Scout's care, full veterinary, specialist if he needs it, for as long as he needs it. And I'd like to invite you both back to this event next year, with our compliments, if you're willing. Fix the pavilion," Finn said. "Make sure someone actually checks the load ratings before people stand on it." Stuart looked at the collapsed structure. "That's already happening." He paused. "Is there anything else?" "No." Stuart nodded and moved away. Constable Wallace walked Finn and Scout to the truck. He wasn't required to. He just did. At the parking lot, he held out his hand. Finn shook it. "Glad you were here," Wallace said. Finn didn't answer that. He opened the passenger door and helped Scout up onto the seat, moving slowly, keeping pressure on the compress. Scout settled in. He put his head on the door edge and looked out at the harbor. The morning light was flat and gray over the water. Somewhere on the dock, the paramedics were finishing with Vivienne's son. Somewhere in the ruins of the pavilion, the fire crew were finishing their assessment. The expensive catering tent had come down with the canopy sails, and the good tablecloths were floating in the inner harbor. Finn walked around the front of the truck and got in. He sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. "You did good," he said. Scout looked at him. Then Scout looked back at the water. Finn started the truck. He pulled out of the parking lot and turned north on Douglas Street, heading back toward the base. The radio came on when the engine did, a country station, playing something slow and steel-gittered that Finn didn't recognize. He didn't change it. He drove with one hand on the wheel and one resting on the seat beside him, and Scout put his jaw on Finn's forearm and stayed there for the whole drive back. The narrator does not know what Vivienne Alderholt did in the weeks after that morning. Whether she changed, whether she tried, that part of the story belongs to her. What the narrator knows is this: the dog with the ruined coat and the hitch in his stride went into a dark place he had no obligation to enter, on behalf of a child who belonged to the woman who had just hurt him. He did not weigh that. He did not calculate it. He simply went. We spend a great deal of time talking about what heroism looks like. We imagine it arrives loudly, in uniform, with someone filming. Sometimes it does. And sometimes it looks like an old scarred dog pulling himself across splintered dockboards on a Saturday morning in August, in a city by the Pacific, with his jaw set and his work not yet done. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. We'd love to know where you're watching from across Canada. And if you believe in the quiet courage of the ones who simply step forward when everyone else steps back, hit subscribe. There are more stories where this one came from.